The history of Black Panthers and SWAT team. Hello, curious people. In a time when everyone demands justice in the street, today we present you a story about Black Panthers, Militarized Policing and SWAT team. When the Black Panthers took up arms to protect their communities, governments passed new laws stripping their gun rights and used military tactics to enforce them. The 1960s were one of the most tumultuous decades in living memory, and nowhere was that more evident than in the American civil rights movement. Responding to centuries of systemic oppression, African Americans mounted a multifaceted resistance that ranged from Reverend Martin Luther King's nonviolent civil disobedience to the any means necessary Black liberation militancy of Malcolm X. So when the Black Panthers started openly displaying firearms and promised to defend their communities against police violence, it created a panic among many segments of white America who pushed governments to respond by enacting strict gun control measures, which even the National Rifle Association supported. When the Panthers still refused to disarm, authorities escalated the conflict with arrests, use of fabricated evidence, and a campaign of harassment that quickly descended into the gangland-style assassination of members of the Panthers' leadership. Amazingly, this was just the prelude to an infamous 8 December 1969 raid on the Black Panthers headquarters in Los Angeles by the LAPD. Expecting resistance, police deployed hundreds of officers during the operation and introduced its newly created SWAT team, the first ever use of such a police unit in United States history, to storm the building. A violent standoff ensued that lasted for more than 4 hours, but the raid's legacy as America's first step toward militarized police is more relevant today than ever. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, in 1966, in response to rising police brutality against members of the African American community. Their initial focus was patrolling African American neighborhoods in Oakland to monitor the activities of police officers. Formerly called the Black Panther Party for self-defense, they quickly drew widespread support from other cities with large minority communities like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia. At their height, the Black Panthers had chapters located in 48 states in the United States. Additionally, they had support groups located in several countries including England, France, Germany, Sweden, China, Japan, Uruguay, Mozambique, and South Africa. Spurning the peaceful resistance tactics of Martin Luther King, the Black Panther Party was inspired by Malcolm X, who had been assassinated a year earlier, on 21 February 1965. Malcolm X argued that the United States government was either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of African Americans. Therefore, he thought they had to defend themselves by whatever means necessary, including the public display of firearms. Malcolm X pointed to the Constitution to support this premise. Article number 2 of the constitutional amendments, Malcolm X stated, provides you and me the right to own a rifle or a shotgun. Black Panther co-founder Huey Newton discovered that it was legal to carry a firearm in public in California while attending classes at the University of San Francisco School of Law. That law had 2 stipulations. The gun must be publicly displayed and could not be pointed menacingly at anyone. Newton wrote in his autobiography, Revolutionary Suicide, "Before I took criminal evidence in school, I had no idea what my rights were." Firearms quickly became central to the Black Panther Party's identity, and they taught their recruits that the gun is the only thing that will free us, gain us our liberation. Black Panther members began carrying firearms in public, and they took particular pleasure in displaying them to police officers. Adam Winkler, the author of Gunfight: The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America, wrote about those patrols. Bobby Seale and Huey Newton used the Second Amendment to justify carrying guns in public to police the police. The Panthers would stand to the sidelines with their guns, shouting out directions to the person that they were watching, and that if anything bad happened, that the Black Panthers would be there to protect them. It was 2 May 1967 when 24 Black Panthers entered the California state capitol and 10 positioned themselves at the back of the assembly chamber. The assembly was in session at the time, with Speaker Carlos B. ordering their removal. The 30-something men were initially disarmed, though police had to return them their weapons once it was clear they hadn't broken any laws. Nonetheless, they were all forcibly taken to the city jail. Fred Hampton's status as a civil rights hero and American icon was tragically cemented when he was murdered in early morning hours of 4 December 1969 during a Chicago police raid on a West Side apartment. Hampton was barely 21 years old but had already become the Illinois chief of the Black Panther Party. The conflict between the Black Panthers and the police had increased in the months preceding his death. A July shootout saw 5 cops and 3 Panthers wounded, while 2 cops were killed and 6 wounded in a November gunfight. It was FBI informant William O'Neill who infiltrated the Panthers and provided his intelligence handler with a sketch of Hampton's apartment. At 5 a.m. on 4 December, police burst into Hampton's home and initiated a wild gun battle that lasted 20 minutes. Most of the Panthers were asleep. Hampton and Mark Clark, a Panther on guard duty, were killed and 2 men, a woman, a 17-year-old girl were wounded, and 1 cop was too. A grand jury would later investigate the raid and found that of the 76 expended bullets found in the apartment, only 1 was traceable to a Black Panther. This raid would be a tragic preview of what was to come just 4 days later on 8 December 1969 in Los Angeles. Acting off false information provided by the FBI, the LAPD went to serve a search warrant on the Los Angeles headquarters of the Black Panther Party, looking for a cache of stolen weapons. The LAPD had just formed the SWAT team, which would be used for hostage scenarios, but also ruthlessly employed in inner-city situations during the tumultuous crime wave to come. The operation to carry out the search involved more than 200 police officers who were armed with thousands of rounds of ammunition, gas masks, a helicopter, and a tank. The chief of the LAPD had even received permission from the United States Department of Defense to use a grenade launcher on the Black Panthers if they resisted. Bernard Arafat, a 17-year-old runaway turned Black Panther, was sleeping in the 41st Street and Central Avenue headquarters when the building was rocked by an explosion. Woken up by the force of the blast, he heard the eruption of gunfire and the screaming of fellow Black Panthers, woken up by the assault. According to Arafat, he had never fired a gun before, tasked instead with helping administer the party's breakfast program for school kids. It didn't matter, he said. I found an automatic shotgun and defended myself. He and other Panthers held off the LAPD for more than 4 hours. Between the two sides, more than 5,000 rounds were fired, making it a miracle that there were no fatalities that day. In total, 6 Panthers were wounded along with 4 members of the SWAT team. 6 of the Panthers were arrested and tried for conspiracy to murder police officers, but all of them were acquitted, with the jury finding that they were just trying to defend themselves. Despite its disastrous debut, the use of SWAT teams expanded throughout the United States. Community relations between the police departments and the Black communities they were supposed to serve only worsened, as these SWAT teams would become a mainstay of urban policing. Though the Black Panther Party would continue through the 1970s, they faced stricter scrutiny and persecution from the government, who curtailed gun rights to thwart their armed resistance to police. Huey P. Newton appointed Ellen Brown as the first chairwoman of the party in 1974, before going into exile in Cuba to escape charges that he murdered a 17-year-old prostitute. When he returned in 1977, the party was vehemently against increasing female power in its ranks. Newton authorized Brown to be punished for reprimanding a male member, and she was hospitalized for a broken jaw. She subsequently resigned and fled to Los Angeles. The death of the Black Panther Party was irrevocably linked to the crack epidemic of the 1980s. By 1980, Newton's drug use was erratic. The party had dwindled to 27 members, and in 1982, it was all over. The Black Panther-sponsored Oakland Community School closed after it became clear that Newton had embezzled about $600,000 to fund his drug habit. Newton was murdered on 22 August 1989 in West Oakland by Tyrone Robinson, a member of the narcotics prison gang, the Black Guerrilla Family. Seale and other prominent Panthers went on to have other careers, some even became elected officials. As for O'Neill, the FBI informant who helped facilitate the Chicago raid that killed Fred Hampton, He moved about the country under assumed names before returning to Chicago where, in 1990, he ran onto a freeway and was struck by a car and killed. His death was ruled a suicide. Today, the Black Panther Party may seem like a relic of the 1960s and 1970s, a time when educating Black Americans on their rights and urging armed self-defense against a racist government was all but essential. On the other hand, some of the main tenets are terribly prescient to this day, despite the egregious mistakes some members made against their own. Ultimately, it's one of the most significant examples of American citizens uniting to create a self-sustaining militia against a tyrannical government they found reprehensible. In the end, I would like to thank you for watching us, and I would like to invite you to subscribe and like our channel.